right. Well, thank you so much for making the time to do this.
I've been looking forward to it, man. Here we are. We're good, man.
Are you here? Okay, we both know the truth. You are here, and you're listening in on the Paul Leslie Hour. And we're pleased to welcome today Drew Thomas Allen, author of America's Last Stand and host of the Drew Thomas Show podcast. Drew Allen's also the VP of Client Development at the famed firm Publius PR. Publius is huge. In fact, they're known as the GOATs, greatest of all time in public relations. Now, this interview's coming out in historic times. That's right. Just 8 days before America's ultimate election. So, by the way, won't you do yourself a big favor and subscribe to Paul's YouTube channel? We'd love that. He'd love that. You will love that. And help us by sharing this interview with everyone you can. And with that, let's go.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, we are in extraordinary times, and we have an extraordinary guest. It's our pleasure to welcome Drew Thomas Allen, author, columnist, podcast host. He's the VP of Client Development at Publius PR. And it's a great pleasure to have him here. Thank you so much for joining us.
Hey, Paul, good to be here. Thank you.
Yeah, great to connect with you. So how would you describe this time that we're in, now less than 30 days from America's ultimate election?
Well, it's an inflection point in American history, in world history, frankly. I have said repeatedly that this is certainly the most important election in anyone's lifetime today. And, every time I say that, understandably, people counter, well, we say that about every election. The last election, it's possible for both things to be true, that increasingly the elections have become more important and significant. And that's because of what we're up against. We have a Democrat Party right now that has revealed itself to be full-throated tyrants, supporters of tyranny. They're against, the Second Amendment. They're against the First Amendment. They want to, abolish the Electoral College. They want to pack the Supreme Court. Everywhere you look, their motivations are to secure power for themselves and to change the rules to benefit themselves and diminish the strength of any kind of opposition in this country. And here we are in 2024, and we have seen a rapid increase. It's happened so rapidly in terms of how far they've lurched left, or maybe not how far, because if you study, the parties, if you study, whether it's the, World Economic Forum or the Democrat Party itself, I mean, they've always been moving us in this direction, but it's happened in a way that I think has shocked a lot of Americans and woken them up, certainly, to what they're up against. And so that's what I would say. I mean, we are living in the present, right? So we don't have the benefit of hindsight. When we look back at history, at what the founding fathers went through, if we look at the Civil War period and Abraham Lincoln, you have a different approach to digesting what happened because it's already happened. And so I've just been really trying to help people understand in the best way that is, realistic, that this is a moment in American history that is as important as 1776 and 1861. 2024 is a critical juncture in our history, and it will determine, the future success or demise of the country.
Absolutely. And it occurs to me, everything that you do, Drew, is connected with communication. There's the PR thing, there's your writing, your book, even your presence on Twitter. It's all communication. What do we stand to lose as people who want to use speech? We want to be free to speak our mind. We want to be free to write what we want to write. What do we stand to lose in this election from that standpoint?
Well, in terms of crackdowns on social media and so on and so forth, I mean, the Democrats have been very clear. They're not even covert about their intentions to, whether it's Hillary Clinton or Kamala Harris, or, I mean, you can almost name the Democrat. John Kerry has been out there as well advocating for this, that, hey, John Kerry, as a matter of fact, said not long ago that, we just need to elect Democrats this time, so then we can change the First Amendment, right? Then we can go about dismantling the Constitution effectively is what he's saying. Hillary Clinton and others saying, this social media, Elon Musk buying Twitter and not censoring the voices that we tell them to via the FBI or the government apparatus. Well, they're making it really hard for us to govern. And so they've been clear. They do not want there to be a free flow of information. And of course, no tyrannical regime can survive without propaganda and control of information, because obviously the truth is damning. And in the Democrat Party case right now, we're seeing that with Democrats in this country that cannot connect or find the correlation between cause and effect, right? So you have Kamala Harris and Democrats who effectively are running a campaign, right? She is Joe Biden's vice president, right? And she has come out and she has supported everything he's done. She has bragged about being the last one in the room when the a disastrous decision to withdraw from Afghanistan was made, and on and on. And they want to pretend like Donald Trump is the incumbent president if you listen to them talk, right? The last 3.5 years have been a disaster. They'll admit out of one side of their mouth, and we are going to be the party of change. Who has been in charge? So the point is, this election is critical to protecting that free speech, to protecting our sacred right that doesn't come from the government to engage in whatever kind of conversations we want, to have the beliefs that we want that are counter to what the government demands that we have. And that is, of course, one of the most sacred rights that any civilization or peoples can have, to speak freely and to have their own thoughts and to do it without fear of retribution. And so there's two parts to what we would lose if we go forward with a Kamala Harris administration. One, of course, yes, is chipping away the eradication of free speech in the First Amendment, but also the terrorism that comes with that of being prosecuted and persecuted and punished for speaking out against the government. So there's a police state component that will effectively have to go with that.
Very good point. Now, the title of your book, which anybody can find on Amazon or anywhere you get books, America's Last Stand. I find that we learn interesting things when we write. What was the most interesting revelation that you had as a result of writing that book?
I think the most important revelation I had was how long what we fear now has actually been in front of our faces. So when I go through and I not only chronicle the failures and the lies of the Biden administration, I go back and look at the history of the Democrat Party itself, whether it's related to the big switch, which is a lie, right? That's when they say that despite the fact that Democrats have been the de facto proponents of anti-Black racism in America's history, right? From the Civil War, and then we get to Jim Crow after that. They say that, in 1964, when Lyndon Baines Johnson signed the Civil Rights Act, that particular Civil Rights Act into law, well, that was the moment that Democrats became champions of blacks and Republicans switched and just became these racists out of nowhere. That didn't happen. It was a marketing technique that was highly successful. And of course, they replaced Jim Crow with welfare, which has had obviously terrible consequences for Black communities throughout America. It's responsible for so much of the pain that particular community experiences in such enormous numbers today. But the Democrat Party has always been what it is today. Their techniques have been the same. The way they lie has been the same. The political expediency with which they change their positions and make decisions has been the same. And they have been a woeful part of America's important, illustrious history, and actually the greatest obstacle to us fulfilling the original intent of the founding fathers to create a more perfect union. It has been the Democrat Party every step of the way that has blocked that, that's opposed that has set us back and taken us off that path. Because, countries go through challenging times, and America's no exception. And what's remarkable, of course, is that we have overcome many of those things. The fact that we won the American Revolution, that defied the odds. That really shouldn't have happened, going against the British Empire at the time. We were nobody. And they were the greatest navy, certainly, in the history of mankind. And you go to the Civil War, and arguably, the South, the Confederacy, had far superior leadership. Their generals were far superior to those that were in the Union at the time. And of course, there were a number of battles that were decisive and things that happened for us to have been victorious and prevailed over the Democrat Party and Confederates, but we were. And so I'm not naive. I'm no stranger to history, if you will. But nonetheless, that's the main thing. The Democrats, everywhere you look, have been trying to take us off of that path.
Well, that's why they call you the millennial minister of truth. I want everybody. Here's check out his Twitter feed. It's at Drew Thomas Allen, Allen, and I follow Drew's account. It's everything from informative to humorous. He doesn't hold back. Let me put it that way. How did you get inspired to be a part of this movement for liberty? Where does this fire come from?
Well, Paul, how Barack Obama and the Democrats like to say that, Americans have racism in their DNA. That's certainly not true, unless maybe in the Democrats' case, it is true. They do have some racism in their DNA. But I have patriotism in my DNA. And I think that is raw and real for the American citizen. I think that I was fortunate to grow up in a household that was somewhat political. I think that, my father was conservative. I grew up in the Dallas area and, driving around, and I lived in South Dallas, so we drove a lot, right? Whether it was competitive soccer matches when I played soccer, going up to North Dallas, or when I went to an all-male elitist college preparatory school in North Dallas, that was a 30-minute drive. So I spent a lot of time in the car, and I listened to a lot of, Rush Limbaugh was always on in the car, to be honest, Paul. And, it's not that, Rush Limbaugh is the only reason that I am what I am. That's certainly not true, but he was influential. And I think I juxtapose my father's beliefs and kind of certainly growing up in church too, I think to some extent, just those Judeo-Christian values that this country was founded on were also communicated to me and became a part of me. And so when I went to a very left-wing high school, or, after high school, I went to Pepperdine, Paul, which is conservative, it's Christian, but I was a theater major. And so in the theater department, even at a Christian university, it was not a right-wing, bastion of liberty. It was very left-wing, Democrats, everyone I was around. And then, I lived in New York City and I ended up moving to Milan, Italy. And I worked in fashion for Marc Jacobs, opening retail stores. So I lived in Italy, which is a socialist country, for, 2 years roughly. And so my point is, I had these two kind of contrasting experiences, right? I had these influences from my father, influences from, Rush Limbaugh in the car, influences from church. And then it was almost like I'm in a boxing gym training, but then I go out into the real world and everywhere I'm surrounded by that which is counter to that training, right? Always being challenged. And I never saw a reason, Paul, to convert, right? I mean, it would have been very easy and convenient for me because I was a loner, and it wasn't. I mean, 2020 was an inflection point in terms of how heated things got. I mean, I lost a lot of friends that said, basically, to hell with you. People that just a few years before were in my wedding. My best man at my wedding is no longer a friend of mine. It's not my choice. It's because I voted for Trump in 2020, and I did not blame him for COVID exclusively and say, he's murdered all these people. And so they decided, well, Trump is Hitler and you support Trump, therefore you are a Nazi, and that's too much for me. So anyway, that's where I got activated though, right? It's those experiences. It's my love for this country. And it kind of got put in this pot and it was boiled in 2020. The kettle was boiled. And I just realized, I've got a kid now, all these circumstances. At the end of the day, Paul, I guess I love the country. Like genuinely, I love this country so much. And because I've lived in Italy, because I've traveled so much as well, I recognize how special it is. And I love history. And so when I understand or look at this moment in history compared to the great breadth, limited in the grand scheme of the earth being around, but the breadth of humanity's existence. My gosh, you can't look at all of that information and not realize, man, this place is a miracle. Man, I am so lucky to be here at this moment in American history. And you know what? I am so thankful that our ancestors, whether you go to World War II, whether you want to go to the Civil War, whether you want to go to the American Revolution, all those people risked their lives. And so what? I'm too timid and afraid to speak up, not run into enemy gunfire, but to speak up because what? Someone's going to say something negative about me. They're going to hurt my feelings. I can't live that way. And I want to set an example for my own family. And I think to do a justice to all those sacrifices that have come before us in terms of human beings, Americans.
That's so interesting. Now, I want to just touch on something a little bit. This time that you spent in Italy, Europe has, just some wonderful, wonderful places. But I too found myself realizing how special America is. It is a very special place. What is America to you? What makes this country special?
I'm so glad you asked that. It's exceptionalism. It has to be exceptionalism. This belief that we are not limited by our circumstances, that we can actually exceed whatever those circumstances or challenges are and defy, right? Defy the limitations that others impose on themselves and become something great to overcome. And not because the government does it, but because we have a ability and capacity in ourselves to do it. That has to be it, Paul. But, and I'll tell you, I started working on, I'm not pitching this because it's not ready, but I started working on a memoir about my time in Italy. And it's just a crazy story of how I got there and that experience at 2 years old, running a retail store with that experience. But as I wrote the book, it's funny because I asked myself that question too. What is it? Like, I love Italy so much. I speak Italian, and in fact, I feel freer speaking the language of Italian than I do English. I actually feel a little bit constrained with the English language, where I feel a little freer with the emotional flexibility of the Italian language. But of all those things, there's something missing and wrong in Italy and in lacking, and it is that. Other nations do not have that belief in themselves, right? They believe that government ultimately is good. Right. And we, our founding fathers, believe that government was a necessary evil. And that's really what's missing today, too, because if you believe that the government is ultimately good, just to go off on a short tangent, this is what shocks me about the inability, perhaps, for many Democrats to have these kind of rational thoughts that piece together. On the one hand, they'll say, well, human beings are flawed, which is true. We are. And so corporations are greedy because the CEOs and the people running these corporations, well, they're just looking out for themselves and they're going to take advantage of their employees because that's what those people do. They're powerful and that's what powerful people do. And yet, where is ultimate power lie today? It's in the government, right? And so these people would portend or claim that, all right, well, there's all this corruption in the private sector. So we need the government to come in and make sure that doesn't happen. And yet they believe that somehow somebody that craves power and authority and control over someone's life, that those people wouldn't also be attracted to government or bureaucratic positions. I mean, this is the thing that is kind of mind-boggling to me, but you get that like in Italy, right? That's the attitude. The government is good. And if you work for the government, you must be good. And your job must be to, tell people how to live their lives and to create equity is really what they're trying to do, right? So, not to get into a big debate and conversation about it, but, socialized medicine, for example, right? Perfect example. Healthcare is a human right. I mean, I too want people to have healthcare and to be taken care of, but it's about the solution, what works, right? What's the best way to achieve that? And, the socialist way of doing that is, if you, Paul Leslie, if there are 10 people And, 9 of you have wonderful health care in the current system. Well, the social solution is to say, well, that's not fair that one person doesn't have great health care like Paul and the other 9. So what we're going to do is not find a way to help that one person out. What we're going to do is we're going to ruin the health care for Paul and those other 9 people that have great health care. And we're going to make sure that everyone has the same crappy health care as that one person. That's the way they look at the world. And it's shameful and it's harmful.
Yeah, and you are expressing something that I've thought a few times, and I've almost heard nobody say this, but it's really, to me, it's one of the greatest points on our side, and that is, if people are inherently flawed, then who's running the government? You know? Yeah. Now, I'm very curious to know, we're getting very, very close to November 5th. Do you have any predictions? What do you think is going to happen?
Man, I got to tell you, and I don't mean to beat around the bush. I just, I was thinking about this today, and my thought was, if we hadn't experienced what happened in 2020, which was wide-scale election fraud right before our eyes, when they shut down the the sports center there in Atlanta, and they said a pipe burst, right?
Yeah.
And they had to evacuate the building. And then we saw a video security footage of the poll watchers evacuating the building, being told to leave. And yet, for some reason, the people that were tallying the ballots did not leave the building, but they continued. They pulled out those troves of ballots from under desks that were, they were hidden by the skirts around the desk, the tables, and they proceeded to count ballots. Well, we had the video, and so what did we learn from that, Paul? We learned, one, that there wasn't actually a pipe that burst. That was not true. There was a leaky urinal in the building. That was the only report of anything that happened. So the whole pipe exploding was not true. It was made up. And then for them to suggest that you couldn't get a response or an answer that would logically align with like the gut check, right? Like, why are you sending these people home, and why is this happening? Oh, well, this, and they just, and so things like that happened everywhere. Mail-in ballots in general, everyone in the civilized world has banned them, except the U.S. wants to make them, commonplace. We don't, like in California where I am, Paul, Newsom just passed a law that, it's actually illegal to ask somebody for an ID to vote. I mean, why would you, if you want, so we know. So my answer to your question is, if I actually could trust, the American people to be able to make their voice heard in a legitimate and responsible and protected way, I would say that there is actually 0% chance that Kamala Harris wins in November. I would tell you right now with absolute certainty that Donald Trump is going to win this election. And I still feel like that is going to happen. But I'm deeply uncomfortable with the illegals that have come into this country, with their access to ballots and their access to voting. We know. I mean, here's the thing. I could, as somebody who loves America and really believes in the American experiment, it would be hard to digest. But I could actually almost digest our country just embracing communism or fascism. The root of both is socialism, but the Democrat Party rule. I could almost swallow that pill if I knew that the American people were making that decision, right? If it was just like, well, I didn't do my job, Paul, you didn't do your job, we didn't do our jobs, we were asleep at the wheel and we lost our country. But you know what? The American people, through the Electoral College and free and fair elections, they made the decision to go that route. But we don't have a situation like that in the country, because what we have is a situation that is rigged against us, and we have to win against cheaters. And it's so frustrating to me. And remember, when we talk about cheating, it's not just the ballots themselves. It's not just what happens with the mail-in ballots or on election day and the shenanigans. It's about what we've seen over the last 3.5 years, almost 4 years, of election interference. It's about going back to 2020 and looking at the fact that we know, based on polling, that if the intelligence community hadn't come out, and many of these people are working in the Biden administration currently, if they hadn't come out and lied, signed their names on a piece of paper that the Hunter Biden laptop was Russian disinformation, I forget how many it was, but it was a significant number of people, percentage of people that would not have voted for Joe Biden. You know, you see the CBS that I think just violated the law with an in-kind campaign contribution because they took that interview with Kamala Harris, which was taped, and they actually edited out her answer. And it's not that they just edited it out. They replaced her response with an earlier answer to another question. And so my point is, this is what we're up against, right? We're up against this machine that is doing everything they can to lie about Trump and who he is. You've got the lawfare state that is prosecuting and persecuting him, and you have them lying and protecting Democrats at every turn. And so that alone is frightening. That's what we have to defeat as well. But I do feel confidence. I think that the Democrats are very fearful and having a moment where they're acknowledging that they probably are not going to win in November. And I just have to believe that enough Americans are so fed up and concerned that they cannot produce necessary levels of ballots in these select states and cities to change that result, the will of the American people.
It does appear, based on her recent interviews and some of the very slight language indications from their campaign, there does appear to be a bit of fear. It kind of reminds me of those moments when a car is swerving before a crash.
Yeah. Yeah, they do seem like they've lost control of the car, and they're turning the steering wheel the wrong direction, you know, and they don't seem to be able to inherently understand how to get that spin back under control. I mean, you know, it's interesting because one of the observations I was making recently is that, first off, the biggest obstacle that Kamala Harris faces is herself, because genuinely, she is a very low IQ individual. She's just not intelligent. And the task that she has would be hard for somebody with a high IQ and with a lot of political acumen, which is, of course, to run as, you know, the incumbent, right? And try and distance yourself from the record while also suggesting that the record is good. And so that's a very hard maneuver to make anyway. But, you know, Kamala Harris and the Democrat Party, I just think that they're out of tricks in many ways. I mean, they're trying to rehash Russia, as Trump would say. They're trying to make that an issue again. You know, they're trying to convince the American people that inflation is up again, despite the expectations, of course, of the experts, right? I think it was somewhere between 2% and 3%, which means, you know, inflation is cumulative. And, you know, a lot of people fail to understand that if the Democrats or Joe Biden or Kamala Harris come out and say, okay, well, inflation's down this month, it doesn't mean that prices came down, right? It's not that we're going backwards. You know, it's that they increased. Like, if inflation is up this month by 2% and last month it was 3%, and they say inflation's down, it doesn't mean that prices stopped increasing. It means that they increased at a slower rate than they did the previous month. So, you know, Americans are just getting killed. And I put it out on X today. I couldn't believe it. You know, I was gone on a vacation in Italy, actually, with my family for close to 10 days or so of this month, this billing cycle for PG&E, who provides my gas and electricity in California, where I live. And my electric bill was almost $700 for the month. And I look, Paul, like, you know, I'm very blessed. I live in, you know, the Napa Valley in California. It's a very expensive place to live. I do not live in a 10,000 square foot house. You know, I've got one kid who's, you know, 18 months old, and it's me and my wife. Like, I even turn the lights off when I'm not using them. You know what I'm saying? Like, that's an obscene bill. And I get I live in California, but to a lesser extent, Americans all across the country are feeling that. And that's because of this administration's policies, right? And so Kamala Harris is trying to convince people like, oh, that's not my fault. And I'm also not going to change anything, but I'm going to make your life better. But people are at the end of the day, it's like self-preservation, right? If you want to survive, you cannot vote for Kamala Harris.
Right. Wow, that's nuts. That is just crazy. Now, this next question, you can say I refuse to answer. You're at Publius PR, where many, many prominent clients and books cycle through there. I'm very curious to know, do you have a favorite all-time client?
Oh man, that's a great question. That's a really good question. I don't know. I don't know that my kind of any of my all time favorites would be any of the celebrity class. And it's not because there's anything against the celebrity class, but with the big clients, um, there's a little bit of a degree of separation. I'll
Yeah.
have, and it's kind of a shorter deal. Like, whether it's Tulsi Gabbard or I'm doing Dinesh D'Souza right now. We're doing Robert Malone. Carrie Lake. We did Carrie Lake, and it's a little less personal, and it's a little bit more, like they've got a book out, right? And so you're trying to get, get as many people served a meal, if you will, of that client as you can within a pretty short window. Maybe you have 2 weeks with them, maybe you have a month or something like that. But I don't know, I have developed a lot of good kind of friendships and relationships with these clients over the years. I know I'm not answering a question, I mean, I'm kind of answering it. I'm trying to answer it by talking through it because it's so hard. But I think that the most, like, I don't know, I've got a client, Fred Galvin. He was a major in the Marine Corps. He was like one of the first when they created MARSOC or whatever. And he was in the Middle East and came under fire, from, I guess, the Taliban. And, the U.S. government tried to destroy his life for defending himself. The Taliban put out all their propaganda that, Galvin and his team, that they were murdering, babies and, innocent Afghans, and the U.S. government took that and they basically tried to destroy these people's lives. And it turned out that the it was not true. But, I would say, somebody like that, where I have such a reverence for military personnel. My uncle was a lieutenant colonel in the Marine Corps, and somebody that I'm able to like really champion and get the message out there, because I believe, I would say those are the experiences that are really just fruitful for me in general. And there are quite a few of those people because, nobody who's, let me put it this way. Liz Cheney is not coming to me and AJ Rice to do publicity,
Thank God.
for her book. And, we would, we've had a couple instances where somebody kooky on the left, I don't know, maybe they just don't look up me and AJ, but they come to us and we turn them down. Like, we're not touching that. Sorry. Principal says no.
Well, everybody out there, the book is America's Last Stand by Drew Allen. Be sure and follow him on X, formerly known as Twitter, at Drew Thomas Allen. He has a Substack, and you can also subscribe to the Drew Allen Show podcast. Do you have any last words for our listeners? Any words of wisdom before we part here?
Yeah, I would just suggest that, this election, it's the most important in our lifetime, and it's incumbent upon all of us to redouble our efforts in the remaining month, until the election, to convince other people to vote for Trump, to make sure you vote for Trump, do everything you can to save this country, right? Leave it all out on the field or on the court, if you will. But it doesn't end in November. The battle really begins if we succeed in reelecting Trump. And what we need to do as Americans is remember that, it's a republic if you can keep it, as Benjamin Franklin said. And we cannot be any longer a generation or generations of people who just want to Netflix and chill. They just want other people to govern the country and oversee it and take care of it so we can just go and play golf. We have a responsibility as American citizens to be actively involved and to be, champions ourselves of this country and to look out for the inheritance ourselves. So, I mean, that's the big reflection I hope people have, is that, hey, how did we get to this point? how do we avoid coming to this point in the future? And it is being greater stewards of America. That would be my advice, I suppose.
Well, Mr. Allen, great pleasure to talk to you. Thank you so much for coming on here.
You too, Paul. Thanks for having me.
All right, sir. Until next time.
You know, the Paul Leslie Hour is made possible by people like you, listeners, viewers. Please go to thepaulleslie.com/support, and you'll know what to do when you're there. Thank you. Thank you, everyone who contributes. Performance of The Entertainer intro song by John Primorano. And of course, this is your announcer speaking. See you next time on the Paul Leslie Hour.